The Cold War was not always fought with intercontinental ballistic missiles and tank divisions. For much of the 1950s, the battle for supremacy was waged in silence, in the shadows, and often in absurd secrecy. The ultimate prize in this war of whispers was not a piece of territory, but a single, unguarded conversation from within the enemy's walls. This is the story of one of the most audacious, expensive, and ultimately embarrassing espionage failures of the mid-century, the CIA's decade-long operation to bug the Soviet embassy in the heart of Washington, D.C. From the American perspective, the Soviet embassy, a massive, imposing structure on 16th Street, was a sealed fortress, the operational command center for the Kremlin's intelligence and diplomacy in the West. Getting inside to plant a listening device, a bug, was the intelligence community's ultimate challenge. It was a problem so complex it required a multi-million-dollar project, years of planning, and a cover operation so mundane no Soviet counterintelligence officer could ever suspect it. The plan centered on a concept known as the perfect bug. This wasn't some clumsy microphone taped to a lamp. This was cutting-edge 1950s surveillance technology. Tiny, powerful transmitters designed to operate undetected for years, collecting every word spoken by every Soviet diplomat and agent inside. The information harvested could potentially provide the United States with an instantaneous, unfiltered window into Soviet intentions, military capabilities, and political strategies, a source of intelligence that would make the expensive, risky U-2 flights obsolete. The execution required a team of highly specialized technical officers, known as the artisans. They spent months mapping the building's infrastructure, studying blueprints, and preparing a suite of miniaturized acoustic sensors. The great challenge was power. A conventional battery would die within weeks, forcing a risky recovery and replacement. The solution the CIA devised was ingenious. Draw power directly from the building's existing electrical system, or, in the most ambitious plan, from the very sewer and water lines that served the embassy. If a bug could be physically installed inside the plumbing, it would be untouchable, disguised by the utility of the building itself, and theoretically powered indefinitely. The key to the whole operation was the cover. No American agent could simply walk into the Soviet embassy. They needed a guise that allowed immediate, unquestioned access to the building's deepest, most sensitive areas, the crawl spaces, the utility tunnels, and the maintenance ducts. The CIA settled on the most invisible disguise imaginable, the American maintenance worker. Posing as plumbers, electricians, and HVAC technicians, a highly trained team of intelligence officers spent years rehearsing their maintenance roles, learning the vocabulary, the tools, and the pacing of common American tradesmen. The actual planting of the bugs began in the mid-1950s. While Soviet diplomats were away at embassy functions or on vacation, the CIA maintenance crews would roll up in trucks, bearing legitimate-sounding D.C. Service Company logos. They entered the building with screwdrivers and wrenches, but their true tools were miniature cameras, high-frequency transmitters, and custom drills designed to implant devices behind baseboards, under floorboards, and, most audaciously, deep within the walls and utility lines. This was espionage carried out not with trench coats and silenced pistols, but with pipe wrenches and tool belts, a quiet war of technical ingenuity waged right beneath the surface of the Cold War's diplomatic facade. The American confidence in this covert operation stemmed from a technological advantage the Soviets simply could not match, or so the CIA believed. This was the era where the U.S. excelled in miniaturization and specialized sensor technology, a direct yield of massive defense spending. The operation relied on two key components that had to function perfectly: the power source and the signal extraction system. The most conventional bugs, hidden behind picture frames or under desks, were battery-operated and lasted only a short time, necessitating risky re-entry missions for replacement. For the Soviet embassy, the CIA aimed for permanent installation. One proposed solution, used in less critical areas, was to implant devices that drew negligible power from the building's own AC current, masked by the sheer electromagnetic noise of the embassy's many appliances. The truly ambitious, high-priority listening posts were placed in areas where diplomatic and intelligence officers often spoke freely: bathrooms, kitchens, and private dining rooms. For these spots, the CIA focused on the plumbing and ventilation systems. A microphone embedded in a heavy ventilation duct, or a transformer drawing inductive power from a major utility line, could theoretically operate forever. The goal was to make the bug physically part of the building's infrastructure, rendering it invisible to electronic sweeps. This required meticulous, almost obsessive planning by the CIA's technical staff. They were intelligence officers trained as master tradesmen. They rehearsed the mannerisms of American workers, the way a DC plumber would drop his tools, the specific swagger of a contractor. They drove plain, recognizable panel vans, complete with ladders and pipe racks, that blended seamlessly into the capital's streets. The cover was designed to be so bland, so unremarkable, that any Soviet guard who saw them would simply assume they were there to fix a leaky faucet, the ultimate mundane excuse. The complexity of the espionage was rooted in the building's plumbing design. The Soviet embassy was, like most diplomatic structures, built with layered defenses and heavy security. The agents needed to access and navigate the deepest utility tunnels beneath the embassy without triggering seismic sensors or disturbing the heavy plaster walls. The installation was slow, painstakingly tedious work, conducted under constant nerve-wracking pressure. The agents had to work fast during narrow windows when they knew the most security-conscious personnel were out of the building. The risks were enormous. If a Soviet counterintelligence agent discovered the American deception, it wouldn't just mean the failure of the operation, it would provoke a catastrophic diplomatic incident, likely leading to the immediate expulsion of American diplomats from Moscow and the freezing of all US-Soviet communication. This espionage mission was running hot beneath the surface of the Cold War, and the CIA was operating on the assumption that Soviet technical capabilities were far inferior to their own, particularly in the emerging field of counter-surveillance electronics. Here is the third message, containing part 3 of the final extended script. The Plumbing Gambit, how the CIA's perfect bug ended up in a Soviet sewer line, part 3 of 8. The main operational challenge for the CIA was not just getting the listening device, the bug, inside the embassy walls. It was powering it and getting the signal out undetected. The solution developed by the agency's Office of Technical Services, OTS, was known internally as Project Acoustic Mirror. This involved developing devices that were microscopic in size but capable of transmitting high-quality, continuous audio. Battery-powered microphones were unreliable and required too much risk to service. The OTS engineers instead focused on developing devices that could be powered inductively or parasitically, drawing energy from existing everyday sources inside the building. These could include the electrical fields generated by the AC wiring, or even, in one truly innovative but flawed design, the heat differential between hot water pipes and ambient air. The energy collected was minute, just enough to power the tiny transmitter. One of the most valuable areas for intelligence was the basement, which housed the Soviet code rooms, but also the crucial plumbing network. The agents realized that the constant metallic noise and the movement of the embassy's sanitation infrastructure provided the perfect acoustic cover. Every flush, every running faucet, and the low hum of the boiler room was white noise that could mask the high-frequency chirp of a tiny parasitic transmitter. The planting required an extreme degree of discipline and professional deception. The CIA personnel were not just agents. They were highly trained, credentialed specialists in their tradecraft, plumbers who could talk pipe thread, electricians who understood antiquated DC wiring codes. They couldn't afford a single slip-up, such as carrying the wrong brand of wrench or speaking with an accent that was too polished. They had to act like men who were bored by the job, irritated by the overtime, and only concerned with the repair order. The windows of opportunity were often agonizingly short, sometimes lasting only an hour or two when a senior Soviet diplomat was known to be away at a scheduled event, or when an urgent, legitimate maintenance request actually came in. During these brief incursions, the agents weren't just planting sensors. They were mapping the internal security of the building in real time, photographing lock types, alarm placements, and the routines of the Soviet guards. Every detail was crucial for planning the next deeper infiltration. This multi-year operation, stretching through the mid to late 1950s, saw agents slowly, piece by piece, turn the Soviet embassy into an American listening post. They hid miniature transmitters inside window frames, electrical outlets, behind heavy plaster walls, and, in a signature move, within the labyrinthine network of pipes running through the basement and the crawl spaces. The entire scheme relied on the confidence that American technology had surpassed Soviet counterintelligence capabilities, particularly in the realm of electronic detection. They were certain the Soviets would never suspect the simple American plumber. Here is the fourth message, containing part 4 of the final extended script. The Plumbing Gambit, How the CIA's Perfect Bug Ended Up in a Soviet Sewer Line, part 4 of 8. The American confidence in the perfect bug operation was fueled by a significant technological oversight on the part of the Soviets. Throughout the 1950s, Soviet counterintelligence focused intensely on detecting traditional bugs, obvious wires, oversized components, or visible disturbances in the room's furniture or plaster. They were experts at sweeping rooms with metal detectors and basic frequency analyzers, but they were almost completely blind to the CIA's radical new techniques. The crucial blind spot was the passive listening device. Instead of a microphone that actively broadcast a signal, the CIA utilized resonant cavity bugs, a type of passive listening technology that required no power source and, crucially, generated no detectable electronic signal of its own. These devices would vibrate when exposed to sound waves, like human voices, and could only be activated and read by a high-frequency radio beam aimed at the device from an external location, often a covert listening post set up in a nearby building or vehicle. This passive technology was a game changer. Soviet counterintelligence teams could conduct room-by-room sweeps of the embassy using their best electronic gear, and the passive bugs would remain completely silent, completely invisible. The Soviet assumption that any bug must have a battery or be drawing heavy, detectable power was the very foundation the CIA's entire operation was built upon. The planting of these passive devices was often done with a disarming lack of subtlety in unexpected areas. For example, a favorite placement was inside the ceremonial Great Seal of the United States, presented to the American ambassador's office in Moscow, known as the Thing, which functioned as a perfect acoustic resonator. But in the DC embassy, the bugs were placed in utilitarian objects that no one would ever examine closely. They were embedded in the mortar between bricks, cast directly into new utility junction boxes, and even concealed within fire sprinkler heads. The operation was costly, consuming millions in black budget funds for research, development, and training. Yet, the intelligence yield was immense. Throughout the mid-1950s, the CIA was reportedly receiving a continuous stream of high-grade audio intelligence from the Soviet embassy. This intelligence provided invaluable insight into Soviet diplomatic strategy, internal political discussions regarding Khrushchev's leadership, and, most importantly, technological progress on their emerging missile programs. The Americans believed they had achieved complete, unchallenged electronic dominance over the heart of the Soviet presence in the U.S. The end of this electronic party began not with a sophisticated electronic sweep, but with a growing, nagging feeling of suspicion that arose from the most unlikely of places: the embassy's low-level maintenance staff. A Soviet plumber, perhaps more observant than the intelligence officers gave him credit for, began noticing small inconsistencies in the meticulous American cover. A misplaced tool, a slightly different brand of pipe sealant used than was standard for DC, or a maintenance request that seemed suspiciously complex for a simple faucet repair. The slow, methodical Soviet counterintelligence machine was about to be put into motion, triggered by a simple tradecraft error. Here is the fifth message containing Part 5 of the final extended script. The Plumbing Gambit: How the CIA's Perfect Bug Ended Up in a Soviet Sewer Line, Part 5 of 8. The mounting suspicion within the Soviet embassy was not immediate or dramatic. It was a slow, creeping realization born of low-level operational security. The Soviet Counterintelligence Service, the KGB, was initially dismissive of any electronic attack on their DC compound. They believed the constant high-level noise of the city and their own basic security protocols were sufficient. However, a quiet, methodical inspection began, focusing not on sophisticated electronics, but on physical security and tradecraft. KGB agents began cataloging every maintenance visit, every worker who entered the facility, and every piece of equipment they brought in. The true breakthrough came from the Soviet engineers and maintenance staff who worked alongside the Americans. They started noticing anomalies: the use of materials that were unnecessarily exotic for the repair job, or a repair that took 3 times as long as a standard plumbing fix should have. A Soviet engineer realized that the subtle variations in the new wall plaster, installed during a purported electrical overhaul, were inconsistent with standard American building techniques. This detailed ground-level analysis was a devastating indictment of the CIA's overconfidence. The CIA's artisans, for all their training in tradecraft, had become complacent, believing their mission was untouchable due to the height of their technology. They had underestimated the sheer paranoia and methodical attention to detail of the KGB. Once the Soviets were alerted to the presence of unauthorized installations, their search became systematic. They didn't rely on electronic sweeps alone, because they quickly realized the American bugs were likely passive. Instead, they focused on physical discovery, tapping walls, X-raying plumbing, and meticulously dismantling areas that had been repaired by the American crews. The first major discovery was reportedly made behind a ventilation panel near a sensitive cipher room. An agent noticed a faint distortion in the metal of the duct, and upon prying it open, they found a miniaturized acoustic lens, a passive resonator that was completely silent. This single discovery confirmed the full scale of the American espionage effort and triggered an immediate, full-scale inspection of the entire embassy. The KGB's reaction was carefully controlled and highly tactical. They did not immediately expose the discovery. Instead, they began a calculated process of counterintelligence exploitation. They knew that by keeping the discovered listening devices in place, or by planting their own disguised replacement units, they could feed the CIA a constant stream of false, tailored, and highly misleading information. For a time, the Americans continued to monitor the signals, believing they had an unfiltered window into the Kremlin's operations, while in reality, the Soviets were simply using the CIA's own technology to run a brilliant psychological campaign. This period, where the CIA believed its bugs were yielding intelligence when they were actually yielding Soviet disinformation, proved to be one of the most effective and quiet counterintelligence victories of the entire Cold War. Here is the 6th message, continuing the extended script. The Plumbing Gambit: How the CIA's Perfect Bug Ended Up in a Soviet Sewer Line, Part 6 of 8. The greatest irony of the entire operation was yet to be revealed. While the KGB was meticulously dismantling the passive acoustic bugs hidden in the walls and ducts, they began to focus on the truly untouchable areas that the CIA had deemed completely safe, the plumbing infrastructure itself. The CIA's boldest plan was to implant a self-powered device, not relying on the embassy's unreliable AC power, but drawing inductive energy from the flow of water and sewage. They called this area the impregnable zone. This was the mission that required the highest level of tradecraft and technical precision from the American agents disguised as DC plumbers. The goal was to secure an audio feed from the embassy's most private and unguarded spaces, such as the diplomats' private quarters, and incredibly, their kitchens and dining rooms. It was in one of these deep maintenance inspections, years after the bugs were first planted, that the final, most embarrassing discovery was made. A Soviet engineer, examining an area beneath a low-traffic basement corridor, noticed a peculiar deviation in the piping structure. Upon dismantling a section of a main outflow line, the sewer pipe, he discovered a professionally installed, custom-made junction box. Inside this box was the centerpiece of the CIA's perfect permanent listening system. The device was a tiny, specialized transformer and a high-frequency antenna, designed to function forever by using the energy generated by the flow and warmth of the effluent. It was the ultimate parasitic listening device, and it confirmed the depth of the American espionage. The location was disastrous for the CIA's reputation. While the device was technically brilliant, its presence in a sewer line offered an endless source of ridicule for the Soviet propaganda machine. The intelligence community had committed millions and risked a diplomatic rupture to eavesdrop on the most mundane and unpleasant activities. The Soviets had all the proof they needed, now possessing the physical evidence of American duplicity and the technological ingenuity of the peaceful plumbers. The Soviets, however, waited. The sheer scale of the CIA's penetration was terrifying, proving that every inch of the Soviet embassy in Washington was compromised. The initial discoveries led to a total electronic and physical lockdown, but the counterintelligence exploitation, feeding the CIA disinformation through the discovered bugs, was deemed too valuable to end immediately. The KGB allowed the audio signals to flow for a strategic period, filling the American intelligence reports with tailored half-truths and political misdirection. When the Soviets finally chose to reveal the full scope of the scandal, it would not be a quiet diplomatic protest. It would be a public, humiliating spectacle designed to maximize the political yield against the United States, proving the aggressiveness of American spies to the world. The great diplomatic reveal of the bugging operation occurred at a critical moment in the Cold War, much like the U-2 incident, demonstrating the Soviet mastery of propaganda theater. The Soviets waited until they had extracted all possible disinformation from the compromised embassy and had replaced the CIA's acoustic resonators with their own inert dummy devices. The public exposure was timed for maximum political effect. Instead of a formal diplomatic protest, the Soviet government decided to unveil the entire sophisticated operation to the world. They held a series of press conferences and invited foreign journalists, exhibiting the captured American espionage devices like technological war trophies. The centerpiece of the exhibit was not the sophisticated miniature camera found in a light fixture, nor the passive resonators from the wall. It was the custom-made transformer and antenna recovered from the main sewer line. The visual implication was staggering and undeniable. The Soviets successfully framed the operation as an act of grotesque, intrusive espionage against the daily lives of their diplomats. Their propaganda focused relentlessly on the low, unseemly nature of the surveillance, painting the Americans not as technologically brilliant intelligence agents, but as intrusive, dishonest plumbers obsessed with listening to the most private aspects of life. The story of the perfect bug that ended up in the sewer is a classic yesterday's yield lesson, a multi-million-dollar effort intended to produce high-level strategic intelligence, ultimately yielded a propaganda disaster and a costly lesson in humility, proving that the most cunning plot can be undone by the simplest of tradecraft failures. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of history. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Yesterday's Yield for more untold stories of the Cold War, and let us know in the comments below. Which do you think was the more damaging Cold War failure for US prestige? The captured U-2 spy plane or the exposed sewer pipe bug?